Well, good morning to you from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is Fifi Peters, quite excited to be with you this morning at the IPA executive meeting. It is an early start and I hope you do have your cups of tea and coffee in hand as we go through the program for this morning, in which we will be looking at new investment strategies in a post-pandemic era. I have this belief that we can't come out of the pandemic the same way that we went in, because then that means that we haven't learned. It means that you haven't learned agility, you haven't learned adaptability, and perhaps you haven't even learned new skills that will be required in a new world. And so this morning, we will be looking at what you as investment promotion agencies can do differently to woo capital into your respective economies as you attempt to support the post-pandemic recovery. We will be hearing from renowned policy advisor, Mr. Simon Arnold, who has advised presidents and monarchs and governments, helping them to better engage with the international community. We will then also hear from your colleagues in the investment promotion space, agencies from Namibia, from Latvia, and also from Lyon, who will share their experiences with us and also update us on what they have done differently over the past while. Feel free to share your experiences with us as well, and you can do so in the chat function. You can send through any comment there, or ask any of the speakers this morning questions. Also, feel free to tweet us on social media using the handles at UNCTAD or at WIF, and you can also post on LinkedIn. With that said, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, Mr. Simon Arnold, an independent policy advisor, author and founder of the Good Country Index. The Good Country Index looks at the external impact that a country has on the rest of the world. Simon is a renowned author and has written 6 books about how countries can improve their images and their role in the world. He's also a TED speaker, and his talk on which country does the most good for the world is the all-time most viewed TED talk on governance with over 12 million views. Simon, good morning to you. I'm certainly looking forward to your presentation this morning. It is over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Fifi, and good morning, everybody. Well, it's pretty early. It's even earlier where I am in the UK. And I don't have very long, so I'm not going to be too ambitious about the amount of terrain I can cover here. The first thing I'm not going to talk about is the pandemic, except to say that if you find yourself worrying this morning about whether the pandemic has damaged the image of your country, you can stop worrying. All of the evidence so far from all of the research that I and many others have conducted is that the one thing the pandemic hasn't done is to damage the images of countries. However, the fact remains that country image is incredibly important. And that's what I'd like to focus on in the next 19 minutes or so. And basically, I'm giving myself really just one task, which is to try to explain exactly the difference, the distinction between the overall image of a country and the performance of its trade and investment sector, because that's a distinction which is not sufficiently made in normal usage. I find that there is an enormous amount of confusion between promoting the image of an individual sector and promoting the overall image of the country. As I'll show you, they're very different things. They're driven by very different factors, and they should be managed in very different ways. So let's start with country image. I think we all know instinctively that country image is important. It's no surprise at all today in 2021 to hear somebody say that the image of a country determines pretty much everything it does in the international domain. Countries with powerful and positive images find that pretty much everything they want to do is relatively easy and relatively cheap. And countries or cities or regions that have negative or weak images find that everything is difficult and everything is expensive. In fact, so important is this image factor that it's partly responsible, some might argue even largely responsible, for the continuing and indeed increasing wealth gap between the rich and the poor world. Because poor countries not only have to cope very often with weak economies and weak infrastructure, they also have to cope with a weak image. It's a headwind against which they constantly have to do battle, constantly having to reassure professional investors, professional audiences, but also the general public worldwide that the country is better than people think. If, on the other hand, as I said, you're lucky enough to have a good image, then life is pretty much plain sailing. So I think countries have realized now, over the last 20 years at any rate, how very important this question of image is. And it's not an exaggeration to say it's become something of an obsession with many governments. Such an obsession that many, many governments have wasted many billions of dollars over the last 20 years in what I would describe as futile propaganda campaigns, desperately trying to convince the rest of the world that they're better than the rest of the world already thinks. So it's really worth asking the question, where does a good image come from? Back in 2005, I decided it was time to do some research on this matter because there'd never been proper, consistent international research on country images. We didn't even really know which countries had good images and which had bad images. We just kind of assumed based on our own experience, which is always a bad way of doing things. And so the Nation Brands Index was born in 2005. I've been conducting it every year since then. It's a very large international opinion poll, and we capture ordinary citizens, quite a large number, about 1,000 in every country. It's a total panel of 60,000 people. It's a sample representing about 70% of the world's population. And within that sample, we also capture quite a lot of elites, decision makers. And their opinions can be separated out afterwards because we collect also a lot of demographic information about them. Almost the first thing that the Nation Brands Index started proving in 2005 is that country images are really not volatile at all. In fact, the first thing I discovered was that the Nation Brands Index was just about the most boring social survey ever conducted, because people really don't change their minds about countries. It's almost as difficult to spoil the image of a country as it is to improve it. Not quite, but almost. Country images are incredibly robust, and that's because they don't come primarily from the media. They come from the society, from the culture around us. The images of countries are vast cultural, social constructs which we buy into, which we absorb when we're young. And almost nothing, except at an individual level, can help us, can encourage us to change our minds about other countries. So propaganda really doesn't work. All of the evidence from the Nation Brands Index and from other similar surveys has shown over the last 20, 30 years that telling people how wonderful you are does not make them change their minds. Most of the time because they don't even hear you saying it. They're just not listening. If a country really wanted to shout loud enough for the world to hear, it would need to be spending not millions, not tens of millions, but hundreds of millions of dollars on media just in order to make its voice heard internationally, because that's what the big advertisers need to spend in order to sell their products. So if we know that messaging doesn't work, then what does work? Well, in 2012, I did quite a complex analysis of the accumulated database of the Nation Brands Index. By this stage, it had amounted to over 1 billion data points, and that's why the analysis was relatively time-consuming, although fundamentally quite simple. I just wanted to ask that huge database one simple question: why do people then admire country A more than country B? And the discovery was quite surprising. Some of the factors you would expect. People admire countries that they think are beautiful. They admire countries they think are powerful. They admire countries they think are successful. But above all, way beyond these ordinary factors, the countries that people admire most are the countries that seem to contribute most to the international community. We like countries that we think do good. If we feel glad that a country exists, then we admire it. And remember why that matters. If we admire it, we are much more likely to invest in its economy, to buy its products, to trade with it, to hire its people, to want to visit there as tourists or business travelers. Everything flows from that good image. So, to put it in a nutshell, the surprising discovery that I made back in 2012 is that if countries want to do well, they have to do good. And if you think about it, it's actually quite logical. Why should I, as an ordinary member of the public or even a professional investor, care about a particular overseas country with which I have no particular relationship? Likely, the only reason why I would care about it is because I feel glad it exists. I feel that it's contributing something to the world in which I live, and which my children live, and my grandchildren are going to live. So I think about a random country on the opposite side of the world with which I have no connection. I'm not interested in how happy its citizens are. I'm not interested in how vibrant its economy is. I'm not interested in the quality of life or the happiness of its citizens, because those things don't affect me. I'm not one of its citizens. What am I interested in? Is it doing good in the world? Do I feel glad that it's there? Is it making society, global society, better or worse? Is it contributing to the peace and well-being of the whole planet? Is it doing something about the environment? Now, if all of this sounds familiar, that's because it is. Companies, corporations have known this same basic factor since the Middle Ages, if not longer. Today, we like to call it ESG. Earlier, we called it CSR, corporate social responsibility. But the basic simple truth behind all of these acronyms is the same. Countries, just like companies, have to earn their place in the world. We have to feel that they're good citizens and good neighbors before we really trust them. And if we trust them, then we trade with them. And it's really as simple as that. So it follows that the way in which a country can improve its image is not by telling everybody how wonderful or indispensable it is. The only way in which a country could improve its image is by improving its behavior. And yes, that is policy. So the people, the only people who are actually responsible for improving or possibly damaging the country's image are fundamentally the people who make the policies, central government. Now, if we look at the way that the majority of countries attempt to manage the image of the country, you can realize that the whole thing is upside down. It's normally handed out to somewhat junior civil servants who are given a somewhat small public relations budget to send out positive messages, to tell the country's story. This is the phrase I often hear. And the problem with telling the country's story is that nobody's interested in the country's story, and they're not listening. As we say in English, and it's an expression which exists in almost every language on the planet, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Fundamentally, the unpalatable truth that we all have to accept is that nobody is very interested in our country. And so the challenge is not, what can we say to make ourselves famous? The challenge is, what can we do to make ourselves relevant? And we're lucky enough to live in an age where that's a really, really easy question to answer, because this is the age of multiple grand sustainability challenges, and indeed a whole load of other challenges as well. This is the age of the grand challenge. You only have to look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and immediately there are 17 reasons to feel depressed about the state of the world every morning when you wake up. And that's a wonderful fact, because it means that any country, any city, or any region that wants to be relevant to the world, that wants to gain a profile, that wants to make people feel glad that it exists, is spoilt for choice, because there are so many challenges that mean something to all of us, because they affect all of us, and therefore so much good that countries can be doing. Now, when I say that, of course, I'm not talking about self-sacrifice. That would be ridiculous. And I'm not talking about old-fashioned charity either. I'm not talking about rich countries giving their spare cash to poor countries, because in so many ways, that's a redundant model, and we all know it. It's still necessary in emergency situations, but it doesn't do anything for the images of the rich countries. It doesn't do anything for the self-respect of the poorer countries, and it often doesn't even do much for development over the longer term. So for me to suggest that countries need to sacrifice themselves in order to gain a better image would be ridiculous. Nations are not fundamentally moral entities, and so preaching morals to them doesn't really work. What really does work is self-interest. And I guess that's what I've been talking about for the last several minutes. This discovery that doing good, having a positive impact on the world outside your own borders, contributes to a better image, is the purest form of self-interest. So no longer do we have to go to governments and say to them, we should do more about climate change. We should do more about refugees. We should do more about education and human rights and conflict and all the other problems, because we'll go to heaven if we do, because it's the right thing to do, because it's morally correct. We don't need to say that anymore. We can say to them with some certainty, we need to do well because it's in our direct, immediate, short-term national economic interest. It is the only way in which we can improve our image. And improving our image is the best, fastest, most powerful way to improve investment, to improve trade, to improve tourism. Because if people like and admire us, they will think of us first and they will want to do business with us. So what does all this mean for an investment promotion agency or a trade promotion agency, or indeed a tourist board or any other individual sector? Well, the bottom line, unfortunately, for those individual sectors is that no individual sector is in control of the forces that shape its destiny. The trade promotion agency, the investment promotion agency cannot control the image of the country because they're not in charge of it. Yet the image of the country affects their work, their ability to do their work, more than almost anything else. They can spend their own budget 10 times over telling people what great investment opportunities there are. But if the country has a weak or a negative image, they're sailing against a very powerful headwind and they will make no progress. So what can they do? Well, I guess the answer is pretty straightforward. On the whole, in many, many countries, the trade promotion agency, the investment promotion agency have a unique position of influence over central government. They may even have a unique position of influence over their other partner sectors, such as tourism, culture, public diplomacy, and so forth. If you want your business to improve, if you want it to survive, then what you need to do is to get together with those other sectors and go and make the case to central government that the country's image needs to improve, and that only central government, with all of those sectors working together, can actually do anything about it. If they're all spending public money, telling the story of the country, bragging about how wonderful they are, their assets, their achievements, their history, their culture, their landscape, it will achieve almost nothing. No country has ever succeeded in moving the needle on its international image through messaging alone. It simply doesn't work. But if they all get together collectively as a whole government and perform a simple strategic task, then they can get somewhere. So sitting down with central government and saying, what can we as a nation do to make ourselves valued in the world today? Because if you want to be admired, you have to be admirable. How can we be admirable? What is our gift to the world? What can we do over the coming years as a country collectively that helps us to harmonize our domestic responsibilities with our international responsibilities? How can we best serve our own people whilst serving the world's population? So many governments, so many people in positions of authority seem to imagine that those two tasks are incompatible. Anything you do for your own people is going to harm somebody else somewhere else. Anything you do for the environment is going to slow down economic growth, that the global is somehow the enemy of the local. And the reason why they believe that, in most cases, as I found during my job, is because they've never even tried it. And one of the really interesting things is that when you configure, when you express the challenge for governments in this way, it's about harmonizing your domestic and your international responsibilities. And you start looking at ways of doing that. How can I best serve my own people whilst doing no harm, and indeed preferably doing good to people in other countries? How can I best serve my own territory without doing harm and preferably doing good to the entire surface of the planet and the atmosphere above it? Suddenly the ideas start flowing in an entirely new way. Suddenly, when you're thinking about responsibilities rather than opportunities, it's a different strategic tack, and you start finding that innovation begins to flow. So it is perfectly possible for countries to harmonize their domestic and their international responsibilities. In fact, there's a whole world of new governance approaches out there, which most countries, most governments have never even dreamt of, if only you start trying. So ultimately, it's about bringing all of those sectors together and working as a whole. to have a national strategy, not a brand strategy. Let's forget marketing for a moment. Marketing is relatively straightforward. And of course, it's something that sectors know how to do. But let's think for a moment about grand strategy. What is our gift to the world? Why should a random person in a random country on the other side of the world wake up one morning just feeling glad that we exist? How do we earn the space that we occupy on the surface of the planet? And if that sounds perhaps a little bit flowery, perhaps a little bit impractical, perhaps a little bit idealistic, then all I can do is show you the research. This is what people care about. And we should care about what our audience cares about, because that's good marketing. And good marketing, really more than anything else, is about them. It's not about us. Not constantly focusing on the product that we're trying to sell, the country we're trying to promote, but thinking first about what our audience out there, our target audience, the professional investors, but beyond them, the mass of ordinary publics who will buy the products that we're producing, who will buy the services that we're producing. What do they want? What are their needs? What do they regard as broken that we as a country might be able to fix? What do they want to learn that we might be able to teach them? What do they regard as being problems in the world that we can fix? And of course, the big news in all of this, and one of the most important things to remember, is that no country has to do this on its own. The idea that each country is somehow competing alone against 204 other countries for space in the market is an entirely redundant idea. Life on Earth is a team sport. It's not a sprint to the finish. And when it comes to gaining a better, stronger, more powerful, more useful reputation for your country, you are not in competition with every other country on Earth. You should be working with as many other countries as you possibly can. Doing so, collaborating to solve the world's grand challenges together with other countries, other cities, other regions, corporations, institutions, powerful individuals, doesn't diminish the reputational gains that you will earn in the end. It increases them, because people like to see countries collaborating and cooperating to fix the grand challenges. We know that no single country or organization is capable of fixing any of the challenges facing us today. We can only do it by cooperation and collaboration. So the message I'd leave you with this morning is simply that. This is no longer about competition. This is no longer the 80s. This is about working together with other sectors, within your own government, with civil society, with business, but also beyond your own borders, with other countries, other cities, other regions and corporations, to tackle the challenges that humanity is facing today. And in doing so, your reputation will magically improve. You don't even have to think about it. It's simply a wonderful consequence that doing well and doing good are the same thing. Thank you.
Wow, Simon, completely blown away. I mean, I came in with quite high expectations for your talk, and I can safely say that you have exceeded them by miles. I like the comparison that you have given us in terms of what companies are doing and have been doing for some time now in championing a greater purpose, understanding that doing so actually translates into a greater bottom line, creating shared value, as it were. And I think that you've certainly given us a whole lot of food for thought this morning, and you've amplified the importance of the investment promotion agency in the coming out of COVID-19. I mean, IPAs were so important throughout the pandemic in communicating information to investors about what was going on in the country. And now we have a whole lot of countries that have got so much planned in the pipeline by way of massive spending on infrastructure and all sorts of deals to try and attract investment to shore in growth. And you've given us a different perspective on, it's not just about the profit opportunity that will entice that capital, but rather if a country is seen to be doing well, then it will do good. Thanks so much, Simon, and I hope you do stay on. I imagine you'll have quite a number of questions coming from the attendees this morning. And in fact, we are going to start off with some reactions from investment promotion agencies, starting off in Namibia, where we do have Miss Nangula Nwanja. She is the CEO of the Namibia Investment Promotion and Development Board. Ma'am, I'd like to welcome you to the stage. Good morning. I'd like to get your thoughts on the presentation that Simon has just delivered, and also if you could just tell us what your agency rather has been doing throughout this time to improve your country's image.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Fifi, for having me on this platform and as part of this discussion. It's great to be here this morning. I must admit I have not followed Simon, but of course, as part of the preparation for today, I've had an opportunity to follow his work, and which is actually collaborated by what he has said this morning. And I will say, wow, I'm inspired and encouraged. And I'm inspired and encouraged because there is quite a few authors, speakers, leaders in the world who I believe that sometimes they say what I feel. So I always say, I feel that way, but then sometimes I cannot express myself well. And therefore, leaders say something, and that is exactly how I feel. And that is probably the way I've experienced Simon from what I have looked up and from what he has said this morning. If I can just recap maybe one or two things. Number one, it is definitely very good for me to hear that the pandemic has not done damages to our countries. In Namibia, yes, Namibia is a small country in terms of population, and we have had our fair share of COVID impact, especially around June and July this year. COVID has had quite negative impact on Namibia. We have lost a number of lives, and then yes, we have definitely turned the curve on it. But as a promotion investment agency, we were concerned that COVID might have done an impact, because then all of a sudden people look at Namibia and say, how do we hold the pandemic? Yes, there was a time that we were on the red list of some countries. And as you are on that red list, you are concerned about the image of your country. Like I said, we have now turned the tide around, and we are really sitting in a place where we have been removed from those red lists. The other item that specifically I noted today that I believe it's good for us to hear is that doing good matters, and that it is rewarded. And it is not only rewarded in terms of individuals, and like Simon says, it's not only the time that we have always told people, do good and you will go to heaven. Do good also as a country and you will do well. And whether it is being rewarded in terms of economic development, whether it is being rewarded in terms of just the reaction and the collaboration that you receive from other people in the world, doing good matters. But then the question, of course, is how do you do good? Of course, as a country, doing good is by individuals. And as a people, you need to do good as individuals. So we need then, and again, Simon says, culture is actually what determines the image of the country. And therefore, what is important is to make sure that our culture, our people, are people that are tuned into the world, who understand the needs of the world, and who contribute as individuals. And of course, when they become leaders, they contribute as leaders. So that is something that is important. The other thing is also the action of leaders and politicians do count, because yes, as Namibians, individuals, we can act. Of course, as media, they can do some marketing, but what do you market? It's about leaders. And therefore, the motive with which we lead becomes very important. Sometimes I say, I think you experience politicians, and I look at challenges, because sometimes I experience politicians, whenever they are not in power, then they are working to get into power, and they don't want to see the country do good, because then they don't have something to kind of attack so that they can come in power. And when they are in power, it doesn't matter whether they're doing good or they're not doing good. They want to stay in power, even if they believe that somebody else is more qualified. But let's leave that one. Let's come back to Namibia and investment promotion. We are a new agency. We just about 7 to 8 months old. Namibia has experienced good investment for 15 years, leading up to 2015, but for the past 5 years, we have suffered. So when we got to this office, we believe that the image of Namibia in the investment community was negative. And therefore, really, the one thing that we did is in line with what has been discussed. It's really about how do we turn around the image of our country, not through propaganda, but through doing the right things. And therefore, currently our focus is, how do we work on policy? We have got some kind of backlog in terms of policy, and then also our service culture. Namibia is a country whose service is not really up to the level where we want it to be, and then coordination of government response to the private sector. So as a team, we are focusing, and we have departments that are dealing with ease of doing business. We are working on our competitiveness and making sure that we have got a good infrastructure in terms of competitiveness, in terms of policy, and we are then coordinating as a country. Yes, we have seen very good responses from investors who are interested in Namibia, and we are therefore making sure that by the time, of course, media does matter, because whatever good you do, you need to make sure that you bring out in the world. And therefore, really, to summarize what we are doing as a country is making sure that we are working with investors, we are working with our nationals to understand where do we need to improve. And then our government has given us the mandate of saying, influence policy and influence government, work with the leaders in government to make Namibia a good country. And then, of course, we have signed up to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is important, like Simon says, we need to collaborate with other countries. So we are looking forward to make sure that Namibia as a country has got good policy, that we collaborate with other countries, and with that one, then we go and yet then communicate those things that we are doing through the media and hoping that we will get a reward for our contribution. So yes, there's a few words to say, but I think definitely in the limited time that we have this morning, that would be my reactions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Fifi.
And thank you. Thanks so much, Ms. Oanja. I don't blame you with all the things that you had to say. Quite a lot that Simon did serve us this morning at our virtual breakfast table, as it were. And I think that to your point about, doing good, not just to get to heaven, I'd even add to say that, you do good to create the heaven on earth that you want to live in, right? To create economies that are growing, economies in which people have access to jobs and are able to sustain their livelihoods and are able to share in the economic prosperity and live in harmony with one another. But let's continue with the reaction. And I have seen questions starting to trickle in. We will get to them. Simon, I also saw you listening quite attentively to what Ms. Oanja had to say, and perhaps just jot down a few thoughts to any responses that you might have from her presentation, and we'll come back to you in the end. But next we're heading over to Latvia, where we're going to hear from Mr. Kaspars Roskauns. He is the Director General for the Investment and Development Agency of Latvia. Mr. Roskauns, thank you, sir. Just your take on Simon's presentation and what's happening at your agency, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Peters. Yeah, I'll try to bring a couple of points over. First of all, obviously, the Latvia is quite a new member of European Union. Not the newest ones, but still, and we have a lot of challenges that also Simon Anholt mentioned. The good news is that Simon said that the IPAs cannot do anything about the state image, and we would say that because they are not in charge about that, and we would strongly argue that is not true, because we just accumulated this power. So our government delegated us also this power to influence the state image. And therefore, our agency is in charge about the investment attraction, export promotion, and creating the state image. This is obviously a big plus from our side, but also a very big challenge in that perspective. That if we know the state image is not marketing, it is political actions and actually the drive where the country goes, then it takes us not only the opportunity to change the path of the country, but also it delivers or delegates to us the responsibility about what are we going to do with this, and where are we going to head. And in Latvian case, I would say somewhere 1 year with this idea. We started somewhere late last September. And what we have been doing is to validate and to create this. If we know that the other countries cares if you do good things, also not only for you but also for them, that we had to arise the challenge that is important for us, for Latvia, and that is also important for the world. Latvia is a small country in the north and green with a lot of different type of challenges than maybe half of the other world. Therefore, it took quite some time while we defined the big challenge that what we want to be a part of solving, because we cannot solve all the problems by ourselves. We went through the UN 17 global challenges and defined our one of those challenges to our state level challenge. When we went through European 5 big challenges and look at those, how they correlate to UN's. Now we look at what's happening outside now, what's happening in the world's, let's say, biodiversity, ecosystem, water ecosystem, and so on. What's happening in the Baltic Sea, and the Baltic Sea is the most unclean sea in the world for now. And we defined that if the Latvia wants to be this location for rapid innovation, how to implement European Green Deal into actually showing how it can be done. Because if you want to implement a Green Deal, you have to align a lot of policies at the same time. And then, therefore, we have to have the focus of what part of the Green Deal we actually want to focus on. And then we define that our mission-oriented approach is the one which is going to solve this. The mission-oriented approach comes from the US. It is more or less like all the stakeholders who are interested in the topic gather around either virtually or physically to figure out to solve the problem at the same time, at the same space. And in the US they did it for mission Moon in Apollo 11, and that created a lot of rapid innovation, but later on transferred like us that such great things as Teflon, for where we cook, and iPhone touchscreens also come from that mission. Therefore, we have the goal that we want to solve, be a part of the solving of one of the UN 17 big goals. We have the idea how we would approach the instrument, the mission-oriented approach, and then we narrowed it down to the our problem, that is polluted sea. And then this is called the Mission Sea 2030. What we want to create is the freshwater ecosystem and rapid innovation in the freshwater. We want to be a part of the solving the problem that 1 billion people currently is lacking clean fresh water every day. And by rapidly innovating and transferring part of the European Green Deal's money into innovating in the freshwater ecosystem, how to use technology, science to squeeze out every drop of, and to use most efficient every drop of fresh water, and including energy. It includes wind energy, and includes obviously hydrogen, and a lot of areas that is connected to that. And then we would be able to help half of the world that is not in the north, that does not have a lot of fresh water as such, to help them with the technology. And in ours, we see that the problem is that European Union, they have very strict rules and legislation and regulation. And what we want to create is this sandbox on the country level, that where to test the technology, not only from Latvia, because we know only the small part of that, but to enable, let's say, scientists from EU to come to Latvia to try the rapid innovation process, to use the European Green Deal money for that, and in this perspective, from this let's say, area, the Latvia would pitch a small part, but the important part in to doing good to the world. And this is very aligned with what Simon Anholt told that the first country you have to do good. You have to do good. And in our case, it's very good that we were able, first of all, to not only promote investment and export, but also get the task to be important part of creating the brand of the country. The next part was very hard to explain to the politicians that the brand is not the logo and not the slogan, because we know that Germany has one of the strongest brands in the world, but nobody can tell what kind of logo is that.
Mr. Rozkal,
Yeah.
so if I can just jump in.
Sorry.
Unfortunately, I'm just mindful of time, but wonderful experiences and initiatives that you have shared with us as to what is going on in Latvia, the work that you guys are doing to promote investments, particularly in sectors related to sustainable development, doing good.
Yes, doing good is the most important part, and then the future will follow. Thank you.
But if you could just kindly hang 10 for a moment, and we'll certainly come back to you if we do have time towards the end of the session. But I'd like for us to just get a form of reaction from an investment promotion agency in Lyon before we get into the Q&A that has come through. We have seen your questions. Thank you for asking them, and we will get through as many as time does allow. Mr. Cédric Grenade is the Director of New Business and Innovation at Invest Lyon. And sir, good morning to you. Just your brief reaction to what Simon has presented to us this morning and what is going on in your agency, sir.
Thank you very much, Fifi. So yeah, when Simon says that the difference of image of a country and its performance in trade and investment is to address, within our agency, we decided some years ago to tackle this by setting up an example by doing, shifting a strategy from doing more to a strategy that doing better. We're working every day on showcasing the value and the principle we advocate for as an economic development agency supporting inward investments. So here as a city, Lyon, given that France carries its own image on which we as IPA pretty truly cannot really influence moreover when we're local. Fortunately enough, France ranks fairly good in the latest Good Country Index. But it is our constant responsibility and mission to work on perception and trends, ensuring that Lyon as a city makes sure to have its voice heard, as we strongly believe about our vision of doing good. We as an agency are doing what we are talking business into achieving, and we are also telling our communities on what we are carrying out. So that's a dual principle. Surprisingly enough, COVID-19 helped our agency, Invest in Lyon, the investment promotion agency of Lyon area, to sell to our stakeholders our vision and strategy initiated in 2018 based on embracing the SDGs as the new guiding paradigm for balanced and sustainable economic development in our territory. As nobody can question no more the fact that we cannot run business as usual any longer, as you, Fifi, rightly mentioned in the introduction remarks. So by focusing on a set of 8 priority SDG, not minimizing the remaining 9, our agency ensures to deploy effort and design initiative with methodology and specific tools, both internally to raise Invest in Lyon as an exemplary agency in SDG compliance. And for this sake, we joined Global Compact a year ago. And externally, with the nature of investment we support. Indeed, selecting projects with positive impact contributing to social justice, environmental transition, meaningful innovation, and not innovation just for the sake of it, positive competition, and it comes back to cooperation, as Simon mentioned, bringing added value and cooperation opportunity to the local economy. And at the same time, supporting investors that prove to have a virtuous DNA through a positive ESG pedigree. This is of utmost importance to run our mission and supporting cherry-picked, unpicked projects to set up operation in Lyon. Additionally, assessing our socio-economic contribution to our territory as an agency is crucial to us to play a part in achieving the UN Agenda 2030. We, Invest in Lyon, we do so by measuring the footprint of the investment we support in terms of net created jobs, and not the traditional FDI standard of number of jobs to be created in a 3-year period that most of the time are not checked after 3 years. Also in terms of financial and fiscal benefits for the local economy and the citizens, but also in terms of saved carbon footprint, impact on flows, raw materials, waste and water, and impact on biodiversity, all that, of course, on a global level, by setting up activity in Lyon for foreign companies. All those are true drivers to our FDI strategy. I cannot end my short contribution without teasing you a little bit with the 8 SDG we prioritize. Obviously, you would guess number 17 on partnership is part of that. Number 8, obviously, on decent economic growth. But we find also the number 4 on quality education, because training on lifelong training is of the most important, and making sure that people getting out of school will have a decent job. And number 5 on gender equality, which I am personally very keen to achieve. And for I am heavily supported by a duo of the INTAD experts in the name of Natalia Guerra and Stefania Bonilla. I would like to take this tribune to address a huge and sincere thank you, both of you. I believe by doing so, collaborating and sharing and working together, as mentioned earlier, we may trailblaze a path, hopefully followed by others, not to be the first one, but to make sure that people will embrace altogether the SDG. The idea is to revert the declining trend on SDG-focused investment, as the yesterday INTAD investment trend monitor reported, and also to ensure that our one planet does not hit an everyday more visible and closer wall. We truly believe in good. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Grenade. It really does seem from what most of you have said in your responses that everyone is on the same page in terms of the importance of creating a shared value to build sustainable growth and perhaps even promote further trade with the rest of the world. Simon, I see that you're still there, and I know that you would like to react to what some of the speakers have said, but can I ask that we prioritize the questions that have come through from the attendees just for a moment? The first question to you, Simon, if also you are able to keep your responses brief, as there are many questions that have come for you, but sir, how does a country proceed that has a good image, but has regions or provinces with bad reputation?
It's very hard to answer that in a generic way, Fifi. I mean, one would really need to look at the country individually. It's quite an unusual set of circumstances for a country to have a good image and for some small part of it to have a less good image. But fairly obviously, if the overall image of the country is good, then it would clearly make sense to refer to that country in the promotional activities of the region that has a less good image, and then gradually over time talk about transferring some of that positive brand equity, if you like, from the country to the sub-region. But it's an interesting question and an unusual case. And I would say that you'd need to talk about that one in more detail, I think.
All right, and that actually applies for the next question, which again speaks to, you know, countries that have cities that have managed to promote good images, but in which the countrywide image is a bit poor. To your point, it will require a little bit more detail and a little bit more looking at the minutiae behind that. But the next question I think is quite interesting. What priority areas should emerging economies focus on to improve their country image?
It's a really important question, and in answering it, I'd like to pick up on one of the several important points that Nangula made in her remarks. And this is, she made the point quite rightly, I think, that it's one thing to do good and quite another for the rest of the world to know about it. And how will they know if you don't communicate it? And that's actually a really interesting question. The good news, I think, that I've discovered over the last 20 or so years researching in this area is that the success does not go necessarily to the richest countries, because the amount of money that a country has to spend on talking about the good stuff it does is not necessarily in proportion to how well that good behavior is actually recognized. The good news is that for countries that don't have a lot of money to spend on communications, there are other ways of getting yourself noticed. And I could talk all day about this, but it's about making the creativity in the policy making rather than in the communication of the policy making. In other words, really imaginative policy making can capture attention by being sort of intrinsically magical, by doing unusual and unexpected things, by not being boring, which is quite a difficult thing for governments to do, because governments, for very good reasons, often are quite boring, and policies often are quite boring. But actually, if you don't have a lot of money to spend on communications, if you make the policies really connect with people, and there's something really unusual and really magical about them, we're lucky enough to live in the age of social media, and they will promote themselves. So I guess the overall message there is, for developing countries, if you don't have enormous budgets for communications, don't despair. It doesn't necessarily mean by any means at all that you'll be unable to do anything about your image. Quite the contrary. You just have to focus on imaginative policy making rather than imaginative communications.
And I'll share an example. Yesterday, there is a school listed on the stock exchange here in South Africa that has done something quite out the box in the form of empowerment. So what it has done is it's announced a scheme in which its postgraduate students will get shares, ownership in the company upon completion, and also has gone further to create investment portfolio accounts for these students in a drive to increase financial education and awareness, as it were. And not a lot spent by this particular company to relay the message, but just because the initiative was so out the box, it did catch the attention of the media. And when that happens, the media does the promotion and the footwork for you. Last question, Simon, is this a call to make image building a broader collaborative process, adopting sustainability through SDGs, ESG, and responsible business initiative principles?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And I think that governments and government departments and the sectors within countries have to, as the Americans say, wake up and smell the coffee, because this is what the world wants. And if you don't do what the world wants, you will be left behind. And it's unbelievable how corporations have been realizing this, many of them, not all of them, but many of them for decades. Countries are so far behind the curve. And I just want to give a little very brief shout out to what Kaspars was talking about in Latvia. I've been following this initiative of the Mission C 2030. I cannot overstate how very important this is. This is the first country I've ever come across that is explicitly pursuing a mission-based approach. And it's tremendously exciting. This presents the idea of a completely new kind of country, if you like, almost an activist country that has decided that it's going to do something more than just promote its own interests. It's actually going to work to make the world a better place and take responsibility for a particular issue and push that issue. This is what we need. We need a world full of activist countries, activist cities, activist regions. And then this whole issue of the advantage that that brings to your image and therefore to your trade becomes almost automatic, almost a natural consequence of what you're doing. What we've been doing up until now is countries focusing directly on trying to build their images, and it just doesn't seem to work. But if you focus on doing the right thing for your own people and for everybody else's people, magically everything else flows. So that's really the way it has to happen.
Right, Simon, thank you so much for joining us, really blowing us away with your presentation. Nothing further to add there. I'd like to also thank the speakers from the respective investment promotion agencies, Cedric Caspers and Ms. Owanja, for your contributions as well. I'd like to ask the attendees at this stage, we will be heading over to the start of the Global Investment Promotion Conference, and just like in a physical conference room, would have to walk over to the next room where the conference would be held. I would like to ask the attendees to let their fingers do the walking, as it were, in this case. You're currently in virtual room number 1, and I'd like you to, in just a short moment, go over and join virtual room number 15, where we will all see you there for the start of the Global Investment Promotion Conference, the proceedings that will be taking place for today. So we're saying goodbye and see you later at the stage, in fact, in about 4 minutes' time, in virtual room 15, where we will start the next proceedings for this morning. Thank you so much, and see you in just a bit.